There we go. Yeah, and then The War of Art, also a really good book. It's just as far as like the creative flow of being a human and like what it means to be human and a creative person. Love that book as well. But like a couple things when you're making music, I say just like trust your instincts. Like creativity is informed by what you feel, not really what you think. And like I find that your thoughts often get in the way. And a lot of times your thoughts are triggered by your emotions. And so if like you're in a bad emotional state, sometimes like those thoughts can really prevent you from like creating your best work. So like finding yourself, and some days are sad, right? There's sad days and happy days, right? But use that to fuel some of your creativity and like use Ableton as like a therapy kind of outlet. I find it's really awesome. Also, what's up, Yuta? Welcome, dude. I'm glad you made it. One thing that Quincy Jones talked about was like a goosebumps test. If something gives you goosebumps, then it's likely going to do the same for somebody else. So if you have a song that evokes an emotion and it's just like kind of like makes you really feel something, it's probably going to do the same for somebody else. So like think about that. And if you feel kind of stale or if you feel like your music needs to be made for somebody else, then a lot of times I think that's going to rob you of like the authentic expression of why you're making music in the first place. And like I used to do that all the time. I think a lot of people are guilty of this, is like, oh, I need to make music so I can be like deadmau5 or whatever. It's like the world doesn't need another deadmau5, right? Like we don't need more of that. We just need authentic you, and whatever you're expressing through your music is the most important thing. The other thing is like song and story. Actually, Robert did an awesome job touching on this earlier today, talking about songwriting, wherever he is. He went home. He's like, I'm done with this place. Yeah, he did a great job talking about that, creating like surprise, tension, movement in your tracks. So I'm not going to go too deep into that. But I usually think of a lot of my time spent in live as like left brain and right brain sessions. So like the left brain is like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to like organize all my best drum racks. I'm going to organize my sample packs. I'm going to like learn the science of sound design or audio, or like just sit in front of your TV with headphones and whatever and just like work on organization of your projects. That's another thing too, is like I have like 1,000 projects in a hard drive that are just collecting dust. And the reality is like it's not a bad idea to go into those projects and just like export some of your favorite tracks that you're like, maybe I'll get back to it later, organize it by genre or tempo or all this stuff, because you know, sometimes you might just go back and like feel that at another time when you weren't feeling that in the moment, maybe at a different time. So something I actually need to do better of, but I think all of us are probably guilty of that. But then there's the right brain sessions where you feel that creative inspiration. And I find like when you have that feeling of, you can call it the muse, you can call it whatever you want, but when you have that little moment where you feel slightly inspired, it's like, jump on that. Like don't wait and like put it off, because usually that's when sometimes your best stuff comes out. But you don't always feel that, and that's okay. Sometimes you have to force it, which gets into like the whole produce drunk, edit sober thing, which I actually like really subscribe to. Sometimes it's like, I mean, it doesn't mean like literally get drunk before you make music. That's not what it means. Yeah, right. Yeah. Just like, just buy a fifth, make some music. No, that's not what we're saying. But, you know, it comes to the mentality of like, you know, if you aren't overthinking the process, like get into your body, not your head. That's kind of the whole mentality of it, is when you're producing and making music, because your head a lot of times is going to play tricks on you. And if you can just put yourself in your body and your feeling, that's another thing Quincy Jones talked about in his book, is one tactic he would do when he was maybe not feeling it or like feeling inspired. He would lay on his back on the floor and he'd put his feet on his bed, and then he would just get to the point of where he was almost falling asleep. Like he'd get super relaxed and he would kind of flow into that alpha state a little bit. And then next thing you know is once he started to feel like he was going to drift off or fall asleep, then he would force himself to get up and just start making music right away, or working on composing or whatever it was. And he found that that was like a really natural way to kind of get out of his head and into his body and kind of get into that relaxed state where he feels creative and motivated to start just putting stuff out without overthinking it. This is another thing. Don't be precious with your projects, which I think we all have. We're like, oh no, like I'm almost done with this song, and if like I go back in and I try to like tweak the snare a little bit, I'm gonna ruin the whole track. And it's like, no, that's not how it works usually. Like, don't be too precious to your projects. Don't listen to it to the point of where you absolutely hate it. I think that's like, there's a lot of value in getting feedback too. Like, I'm very thankful I've got some homies where we have these sessions with Rob. I'm not gonna say what it's called, but we all get together, we like make music, make beats. and like we just give each other feedback. Same thing with like online communities. There's like a lot of Discord communities where you can share tracks, get feedback from people. It's also really valuable. Yeah.
I'm not asking what it's called. Don't tell me what it's called. Like, is that a podcast episode where you guys get together and do something? It would be a cool one.
It would be a cool one. I don't know how we would do it, but I'd be down.
I want to be a part of these.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, you can use your imagination. We make beats. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, there's Ableton user groups as well. You know, I don't know how active the LA user group is here, honestly, because I live far away, but.
Not as much, but will be soon.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, like, that's a great starting place, is to find a community of people and.
I'll share the link with you.
Yes, okay, perfect.
Discord communities. I know like Superfuture has a whole producers chunk in his Discord.
Yeah.
Where a lot of other producers giving each other feedback.
There you go.
Some producer Discords will have good feedback.
Yeah, I'm in one for Rachel K. Collier.
Oh, cool, yeah, she's
And,
great.
I mean, she just hosted, I got to go, she just hosted a meetup in Berlin headquarters.
Yeah.
That was really dope.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
100%.
cool stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of them out there. And even tomorrow, we're going to do one-on-one track feedback with all of you. So, like, obviously this event is a great place to do it. Yeah, overcoming writer's block can be like a real struggle, and there's a lot of like great like ideas out there on how to do that. Some quick things that are practical that I think has helped me personally is just like sampling new sounds. I mean, Trusco talked about using the push 3 to like sample stuff real quick. That can like create some new inspiration, new ideas. I sample stuff off of YouTube, even vinyl. Actually, Chuck Sutton, you told me about radio, I think, in the podcast episode. Yeah, you were the one that told me about that. I downloaded it the next day and I use it all the time for like hip hop vocals. I'll like rip and then use LALAL.ai. It's like one of my favorite stem separations. Yeah, shameless plug. They sponsored the podcast, but I actually do like them. Resampling stuff, like use a rack, use like a fat rack like Rob was showing and just like mash up the sound, resample it into another track. Also make sure you route it so it's not necessarily going through the master and getting slammed through limiters and stuff, which might make it worse. Taking your song places, like I have a Dropbox folder, like after I'm working on a song and it's got like maybe a minute worth of a song, I'll just like bounce it, upload to Dropbox, and I'll take it to the gym. Like I take my dog on lots of walks because he's a total crackhead and he has to be outside like 10 times a day. So I'll just like put on my AirPods, I'll go outside on walks with him, I'll listen to music I'm working on all the time. And like there's something about having a visually different atmosphere or an environment that completely changes your perspective of music. There's just something about it, it's like a phenomenon. I know like Il Gates, when he was on the podcast, he was talking about how he just shuts off his computer monitor sometimes when he's mixing, and just because he can't actually see what's going on, and he'll just like close his eyes, or like Dennis DeSantis said that sometimes he'll like take his headphones off and he'll like flip them up so he can hear it just through the headphones, which is mostly just mid-range and treble. You'll notice like mixing stuff that way too. Or if you get up and go out of the room, I'm sure we all have like that moment, maybe if you have monitors in your studio where you stand up and you stand in the corner and you're like, this is where all the bass is. Like moving around your room, getting new perspectives and not just sitting and like having your eyes bleed out of your head staring at a monitor for like 3 hours makes a huge difference. Trying new tools, setting limitations. I actually fell in love with Wavetable again. I hadn't used it in forever. I became like a serum junkie for a while, and then like I ended up just deciding, okay, I'm going to produce a track and I'm only using Wavetable. And I learned so much in that process, and like now I use Wavetable probably more than I do Serum or anything else. Also asking Abe questions. Shameless plug. The AI chatbot, his name's Abe, by the way, in case you didn't know. So you could do that too. This is the track that Tresco and I made. We actually sampled my dog's squeaky toy in it. It's actually pretty cool. I'm a huge fan of like sampling random stuff, especially my dog. Can you guys see this? Should I blow this up? Is this too small? A little bit? Okay, let's blow it up. Let's see.
You showed the Command Plus.
Command Plus. Oh, wow, look at that, dude. Snaps. Command Plus. Command plus or minus to go up. This is why you're here, Yuta. This is why we invited you. Yeah, thank you for that. Sick. All right, let's listen to this track. I'll kind of show you what it sounds like, and then I'll break down a bunch of different stuff inside of here. So. I should also preface, this was missing a lot of plugins from my studio computer, so it sounds a little different than the master. Here's a squeaky toy. Yeah, it's good times. Also, shout out to Rob, who helped engineer and record some of it in the studio. That was your first Pro Tools session, dude. It was a little time capsule. It would have been better in Ableton, honestly, but it's fine. It's fine. The mic placement was good, yeah, and the guitar. What was the name of the amp that we used for? That thing is so sick. It's the most insane amp. The Mesa amp for the win, dude. I was in love with that thing. I almost stole it that night. I was like, that's probably true. I threw it up my back. I'm turned 36. Anyway, all right. So I'm gonna break this down, and it's gonna be like probably all over the place a little bit. Like I said, a lot of other people are talking about topics in much better depth than I am, but just gonna kind of show you what this track looks like in and out, and some key concepts I use in most of my tracks. So in the drum group, I have the drum bus. I'm a huge fan of this thing, not just for drums, but I put this on pianos and like give the drive a little bit of drive, give it some crunch if you want to saturate stuff a little bit. So I pulled the drive down because the gain staging of all this stuff inside of this drums group was like getting pretty hot. So I pulled the drive pretty low, pulled back the trim a little bit. It didn't need to compress because I was already clipping and doing some compression, so I turned off the compressor here. But you can turn that thing on if you just need a little bit of extra like dynamic like glue to your mix. I pulled back the transients. If you're not familiar with like transient shapers or transients, like typically if you're going to pull this to the left, it's going to actually pull back some of the initial spike or the pluck, and it can also increase some of the sustain a little bit, or reduce. And then if you push to forward on the transient, you're going to get more of that top end pluck and pull back some of the sustain. So that's typically what happens with this, a lot of transient shapers, and this one in particular. Dampening the drums, you can do low pass filtering. I pulled it back like to 10,000 hertz to give it just a little bit of warmth. Otherwise, you can just crank it up to the full 20. This thing's cool actually to put on like a kick drum. Like if you just want to throw a drum bus on a kick and make like an 808, you totally can. So like for example, if I just have this kick, let me just solo this kick, and you give it a boom. Turn up the boom. You can turn up the decay.
That sounds like Netflix.
Yeah. I know we don't have a sub, but that sub is definitely ringing out and bumping if you turn up that decay. So you can also dial in the fixed frequency. So like I think this track's in the key of E, maybe. So you can just choose like E, which is like about 41 hertz, 40 hertz-ish. And then that can also really like tune the low end of your kick too if you need some more low end thump. If your kick needs a little more girth or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, and so then that's that. Then also for a lot of times I'll group just my kick and snare and I'll clip them. A lot of this, like when it comes to like clipping, I think a lot of it is determined by the genre and like the sample that you're using. Some stuff I don't feel like even needs clipped, but I wanted this track to be loud enough. And so if you're just chopping off and cutting the peaks in the waveform, you have like this, the kick and snare bumping, but if you just give a little haircut to the top of the peak, you're actually distorting the waveform. And you can actually get a little more crunch in top end and a little more smack out of your drums. So I'm always clipping my kicks and snares if I'm making like more aggressive like dance music kind of stuff.
Quick question.
Yeah.
How much are you clipping? Like, how many dB usually like
Well,
before it starts getting?
Yeah.
I mean,
That's it, because you can overclip stuff. Yeah, for sure. If you overclipping stuff, it's just going to sound like hot garbage and it's going to be over distorted. But
I
if
started doing that with the GM audio clipper recently.
yeah, did you like
1 or
that?
2 dB.
It's the Max for Live device, right?
Yeah, I think
So
I heard about it from your podcast.
probably. That's where I heard it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, so we're actually going to test out and see we're going to have a little clip off. We're going to we're going to see which clipper we like the most. So I'm just soloing this kick and snare, and this is standard clip. This was the winner for me. This is my favorite clipper that I've used. My friend Corey Miller, shout out to him. He's like engineered like Eminem and a lot of people in the hip hop world, and he was like, this is the best clipper I know, and I think he's right. You can also oversample like 256 times, which isn't stupid. But yeah, so like this is what it sounds like. So you can see this little red peaks right here. I'm not clipping it that hard. I'm just giving it like a tiny little trim because and if I pull this thing way down, you can hear how destroyed that is, right? So just a little bit, I feel like goes a long way. Now I set the gain, so it's actually exactly the same for all of these plugins. So that's standard clip. Let me turn this off. And now this is K-Clip, which is free. It's a free plugin, really popular, especially in like the bass music world. That's what this sounds like. Now you also have a soft clipper in the glue compressor, which I use a lot, and I got kind of like an analog tonality to it. This is modeling the SSL G-Bus compressor, really popular compressor in studios for forever. And so I adjusted the utility, I boosted the gain, and turned on soft clip here, and then once you see that light ticking, that's when you know it's clipping. And then I also adjusted the gain with the utility afterwards to pull it down so it was matching these plugins. So this is what it sounds like. I also turned down the dry wet because there's actually like a coloring of the character of the plugin if you have the dry wet up. It's very subtle, but it is a little warmer. It actually warms the peaks of the waveform a little bit.
Oh wait, so if you
And I pull down the dry wet. You're still getting the clipping, but you're bypassing the character of the device a little bit. And it's a taste thing too. So like if you want that, great. If not, and then this is also the new saturator. Shout out to the new saturator, right? It's so sick. We love the new saturator. Yuta and I talked about this on the podcast recently. And so I did the same settings for the gain on the utilities. You have soft clip, you have a hard clip, which is more aggressive. Soft clip, if you have the waveform and say it's like going like this naturally, actually I have a little beautiful display presentation there. I could pull up and show you what that looks like. This thing. So if you're clipping, a soft clip is going to be more of a rounded cutting of the waveform. Hard clip is going to be just this white line that's just like straight up cutting. It's going to be really aggressive, which can be really cool on like aggressive bass sounds. If you're trying to make an aggressive bass and do sound design and stuff, it can be really cool. Typically for drums, I like a lot of soft clipping. It sounds a little more natural and you still get that distorted kind of like harder punch sound. And you can always overdo everything. It's just a matter of what you want to do. But this is a hard clip, and then there's a soft clip and a no clip. Same thing, I turned down the dry wet. I actually think it sounds better without the coloring of the saturator on. And this honestly, I think, is just as good as the standard clip. I think these are like my two favorite. Let's compare. So this is the saturated, dry wet at 0. And then now let's go to standard clip.
No visual feedback on the saturated though.
Yeah. You could see the little clip right here, actually. There's a little bit of a clipping light that shows up. Yeah, and you can also turn off the color. Well, that wouldn't matter because the dry wet's at 0. So yeah, that's clipping in a nutshell. Don't need to go much deeper than that. I like to clip my drums. It's fun to clip other stuff too if you need it to be a little more in your face, a little more distorted, a little more aggressive. I have another group for my other drums because I didn't want to clip those, so I just grouped the snares and the kick together. All that going, getting a little group hug through my drum bus. Let me turn on that back on. The other thing when it comes to when it comes to like just drums and like producing in general, like I'm very intentional about panning stuff. Typically, like I'll have my snare just a little bit off to the right. It's like 4. I have the clap to the left. It's 3. I don't want to have like really transient material overlapping because then you kind of get this weird like kind of like flammy snap that can sound really kind of bad or like over distorted when you have, especially if you're clipping stuff too. If you have like the transient hitting at the exact same time, it's going to just have this really kind of bad overlap that can make this like bad distorted kind of sound in your mix. So I'm really careful about like not overlapping a bunch of really transient dynamic stuff on top of each other and like just offsetting that a little bit. You can also do that with the track delay, which is really sick, which if you open up track options, then you can see the track delay down here. So sometimes even just like pushing it back like 2 or 3 milliseconds with your like snare, if you have 2 snares that you're layering, can make a difference. I kind of did similar thing. I did that like manually, which probably was just like the longer way of doing it, which didn't make sense. But on my snare layer, you can see that like if I zoom in, this is like audio, and then the other one's actually MIDI, and I made sure to offset them. So if we zoom in like hella close, you can see they're not hitting at the same time. I've got this clap and then the snare layer, and so they're all hitting a little bit at a different time. See how they're offset like that? So if you're trying to get like a fatter sound and you're layering snares and stuff, outside of just EQing, just like try to maybe make that little bit of that flam can kind of sound a little more natural and not as like aggressive in a bad way. Same things for like the toms. I panned off, I think nope, just kidding, I didn't do that. Kick usually in the center. A lot of low frequency like sub content, like your kick or your sub bass. Usually you want that in the center of the mix. It's going to translate better on a bigger system. So that's something to keep in mind. We'll talk more about that a little bit. There is this thing called the selector kit. If you are like, man, I just want to like produce faster, or like rather than having like say 4 different drum racks of sounds and you just load a drum rack, this is a really fast way just to have like all of your kicks and all of your snare samples in one drum rack.
Is this your new infinite drum
The
rack?
infinite drum rack, yeah. So actually I stole the idea from Il Gates. He made the what was it his called? The 128s rack, yeah. And he took it from the drum rack, which is the selector kit, which is like a preset that's been around for a long time. I think a lot of people don't even know. So if you just like search in your browser for selector kit, then you can drag, there's a couple different ones. The selector kit warm or the clean are like the 2 ones. And then this is what it looks like. This is the clean kit. And when you drag it, it's right now a simpler, or sorry, yeah, it's a simpler instrument. But if you click on one of these pads, let's say toms, right? Here's the toms. If I wanted to, I can right click, and it's a multi-sample mode. So I'm going to actually change this from a simpler to a sampler. And when you do that, you have access to this little zone tab. And now when you have access to all the zones, I don't like any of these sounds. So I'm just going to highlight, Command A, delete, they're all gone. I'm going to create a folder in my user library where I have all my favorite toms. Let me just search tom. And then samples. Drums, toms. All right, 6. So I'm just going to highlight all these toms. I'm going to drag them in here. And you can like obviously curate your favorite tom sounds or whatever. You can make multiple selector kits for yourself. But then now that all of these are in here, go to the selector tab, because you have key, velocity, and then select. And in select, if you just highlight all these and right click, choose distribute ranges equally, it's going to make it so that you have the little chain selector here. It's kind of hard to see. It's got a little dot on it. And now you have, this is already set up to change that selector kit because the selector kit was already mapped with these macros. Now you can just move this knob, and now when I play a note, if I can find the note, I think I have to arm the track. Where you at? Boom. Now if I play a tom note, if I can go to the, where are we at? There you are. Nope. There we go. And now if I just turn this knob, now you can access all the different drums you want in your sample library really fast, and it's all in just one cell in the drum rack. Does that make sense? Okay, sick. So yeah, chain selector, or selector kits for the win. Just save this in your
similar sample feature now that's in 12.
Totally.
Does that work with multi-sample, like pad? What's the word I'm looking for?
You could.
Like, does that work with that kit? Like, can you change that whole kit on a dime right now?
So unfortunately with sampler, you don't have the sample similar sounds. Isn't that right? With the sampler, you don't have that.
The
Yeah.
whole rack.
Unfortunately.
Whole rack, similar sounds like on the selector.
Well, you can do, I think you can do it from the sample list, no?
In here in the zones.
Right at the top of right next to it says selector kit clean. You know the little squiggly?
Oh, here.
Yeah.
That's gonna swap out. So it would swap one of these out for another one singular sample, I think.
Yes.
Which would not be necessarily
You can choose a tone that you like, and then go to the browser and do it in the browser.
right.
My
Yeah.
question is, I was trying
So
to build a kit where I could have those macros with, like, not necessarily sample, but shaper, tone, whatever, and just move through the similar
Yeah.
samples and keep the macros so I can have them on my
100%.
One
One way would, so I don't know if I fully understand, but one thing you could do is be like, okay, I really like this sound from my collection in my user library that I dragged into the zone. Then I could say, okay, I'm going to go up here, Tom AC 2C, and then I'd find that sample, and then here you could do the similar sounds, and then find other ones that you like, and then just like drag these into the chain as well with it.
Yeah.
That might be the workaround for that.
I think you can also right-click any audio file anywhere and go show in browser, which is really helpful too.
Yeah,
Well, you're in the browser already.
right. Yeah.
You can click on the sample, but
Right. The sample wouldn't be, you could do manage sample
show in browser, yeah.
or show in browser there, and that would show up. Yeah.
And then just do that.
My computer's confused. There we go. Yeah, so you could just show in browser that sample. Well, it wouldn't work because it's in multi-sample mode. Yeah, so it's not going to, and it didn't do that in the zone either because I looked into the zone to see if I could.
I guess if you had a regular drum kit that wasn't multi-sample and you went to do the similar samples, change the whole kit, every sample in there, could you still have macros for each pad set up that stick with it?
Yeah,
Is that what I'm saying?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, for sure.
Which one did it, when you right-clicked it, it did pull up a sample. I'm curious to know if the fact that you've got it selected in the chain selector is like how it decided which sample to pull up when you right-click the, like.
There's a show in browser in the chain, in the zone if you right-click.
Multi-sample area, and it picked one sample from that. I'm just curious to know which one it picked.
Hopefully,
I don't know.
Because if it was the one that was selected, that would be crazy if you just like chain selected.
Wait, where did you see that?
but when you right-clicked on multi-sample mode in the sampler and went to show in browser there.
Yeah.
Show in browser.
It didn't do anything.
Oh, E per
No, is it,
7
like, crunch
isn't.
the number?
Oh, wait, no, it's thinking. It's doing something.
Oh.
Oh, interesting. It didn't.
Huh.
It actually did take me, I think, to, let's try this on this percussion effects show in browser. E-perk effects. It didn't, there, it did. Actually, it took me to it.
Yeah, is it the one
But
that's
it-
like highlighted in the?
But it must be the one that's selected in the zone, I bet.
That's sick.
That's actually pretty cool, yeah. Yeah, we could probably talk about this for longer, but I have other notes. so we should probably. I mean, this is a good place to do that, though. You know. Okay, sick. So that's that. Side chaining. Let's nerd out on some side chaining stuff for a second. This is like a great debate amongst a lot of people in the Ableton Live world and community. Obviously, the shortcut is you just download Kickstart too, and it's fine. Like whatever. Yeah, and I know Andre's dancing back there. He's happy. He loves Kickstart. I actually haven't tried Rob's side chaining. That actually seems like a really cool solution for the what's it called again?
GM Audio Ducker.
GM.
You talk about a GM Clipper too.
Yeah.
I gotta check out his other stuff.
That one I liked, and visually it's really nice.
Squeeze? Yeah, I'm all, yeah, it sounds all
There's also a
great.
free one called STFU.
STFU.
Really great.
Okay, STFU Max for Life.
No, just a plugin, but it's free.
Oh, okay. STFU plugin sidechain. By Zeke. This thing. Interesting. It looks kind of like a shaper a little bit. Yeah. Okay, sweet. We'll add that to the arsenal. So typically what I've done is probably like the longer workaround, but it's always worked for me and it's always sounded great. The issue with a lot of this whole side chaining problem, if you don't know, is there was a change in Live 8 to 9 where they used a different coding or whatever and created a new compressor. So the more modern compressor, I'm side chaining all my basses grouped, all my basses. You have this, which is the regular side chain compressor. If you open up the little window, if you wanted to set this to peak or RMS and you have the attack all the way down to like 0.01 milliseconds, it creates a little bit of a popping or click sound. When you're side chaining to like a kick. Obviously one of the most popular reasons to side chain is your kick and bass are fighting each other. You want the bass to jump out of the way when the kick hits. And it does create a very subtle little poppy sound. So this is what that sounds like if we were to turn on this compressor. Let me just solo the, let me just solo the drums and then also solo the basses. And let's hear what that sounds like. There's a little subtle pop in there. It's so subtle, it's hard to hear, but like, you hear that? Yeah, we don't want that. That's not fun. When you have everything playing, it's harder to hear it, but it is there. It is a little artifact living. Now, if you're going to use the Live 8 compressor, which you can download from BeatLab Academy, isn't that right?
I got everyone today some racks, including the 8 compressor.
Yeah. So you can download, just like search Live 8 compressor download. And this like kind of mitigates that because it's using an FF1 modeling. It's a feed forward. So it's a different coding of the compressor, different compressor. And if you have a high ratio in the fastest attack, it doesn't do that. Yeah, so you can hear it's not that popping or clicking.
That pop is still there in 12?
Yes, with the modern compressor, the regular compressor. This is the Live 8 compressor that I'm using that didn't do the pop clicking thing. Typically, I like to produce a lot of MIDI drums just because I feel like there's some flexibility, and then if I wanted to, I can always print it to audio. But having that flexibility of using MIDI makes it easy for me just to copy and paste all of my kick hits to create a trigger track. So this track is turned off, you can see it's muted. And then I'm actually, this is the kick sound on the trigger. It's like a really fast short clip because then you can actually dial in the release time on the, you can really dial in the release time on the Live 8 compressor. So you have it set at about 20 milliseconds right now. I turned up the look ahead, gives the time, it's a little bit of time for the compressor to react. The thing about look ahead is if you turn on look ahead for like everything in your plugins and all your devices, it can actually insert a little bit of latency, make this kind of weird timing issue sometimes if you have a heavier project. So I don't always recommend turning on look ahead for everything, but for this instance, I turned it up. That also helps preventing some of that popping, clicking sound. Any questions about that in particular? No? Pretty sweet. All right. We can move on. Yeah. Let's talk about, what was I saying? Basses. So bass group stuff that I'm doing. I always check my basses in mono. Typically, if your bass sounds good in mono, or your whole track sounds good in mono, then likely a lot of times going to sound good in stereo. So a lot of times on my master, I will have a utility that I'll just like check and turn on. It's in mono and just kind of hear what it sounds like. If anything's disappearing or dropping out, that's a good indicator you might have phasing issues, or it's just too quiet, or like, you know, maybe you spread it too wide with like a chorus or like a stereoizer or something like that. So listening to stuff in mono makes a big difference too. Oops, we're listening. Yeah. Yeah.
When you're exporting it, it says like convert to mono. What are your thoughts on that? Does that like fix your problems forever?
No.
No.
So converting it to mono is just you're just gonna bounce the whole track in
I
mono.
never turned it on, but I was just wondering.
Yeah.
It's like something-
I don't think I've ever used that.
If you were making sounds for video games, you would, because the engineers would understand which
Yeah.
you're from, so all your sounds need to be in mono.
Yep.
So for things like that, or app development or video
That
games
makes
and stuff,
sense. Yeah. Yeah. Certain specific use cases, I could see maybe that would be good. But for just regular music you're uploading to Spotify and stuff, you probably won't do that. Unless you just want some really unique mono, whatever. Yeah, so bass processing, I'll do like a lot of EQ and like some compression and stuff like that on my bass. I don't really compress my subs too hard because I want them to breathe. And I'm also hitting a limiter on the bass group. I'm actually setting a ceiling here at 0 dB. And this is something that Slink and Ahi did a workshop and I watched, and it was like really fascinating about doing bus limiting or serial limiting. And the idea is that like you're creating a ceiling. This limiter is not actually working. I'm not pulling down the threshold. I'm just setting it, I'm just dropping it on this track, setting the release to auto, and I'm doing this on my leads group, on my basses group. And the reason I'm doing that is because as like I'm trying to get the song louder, using just only having one limiter on your master and everything smacking it, it's going to be a lot harder to control the dynamics and to get your music loud enough, because that one limiter is doing so much work, it's having a hard time like controlling everything, right? It's like if you were like a juggler and somebody just gave you like 650 balls to juggle at once, you're going to have a hard time like trying to keep all of it managed at one time. Same thing with one limiter on a master. Yeah.
What about the same concept with clipping? Because limiting is just turning it down with the peaks, right?
Yeah.
Is there a combination that's ideal?
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends up to you. Honestly, I think Andre would be a great person to talk to about that as well, in like the sound design stuff too. I'm sure he might touch on maybe some of that. But yeah, so like really just creating the ceiling. You notice that like right here it says minus 2.31 of gain reduction. That means that the limiter is saying at some point there was tracks that were louder than others that were hitting that ceiling and it's pushing it down that much. And then a lot of times I'm actually just turning up or down the tracks in that group to try to get them to kind of balance well within that limiter as they're hitting. And it's really not limiting too crazy hard before I get to the master. And I'm also doing some glue compression here. And then I have my Pro L. There's also a lot of people now who are running their tracks into the red in the master. There is something, yeah, I know. And it actually sounds good. It sounds good. That's the crazy thing. The clipping is like, but here's the difference too. Like when we're talking about clipping and stuff, like there's good distortion and then there's like some really shitty digital distortion that can happen too. And having the knowledge of knowing the difference is really important too. So like for an example, like if I'm like building up one of these bass tracks, and I've got a bunch of processing on them, I'm always just consciously looking to the right of each device. You see there's like these little meters for every device that's not in like an instrument or audio effects rack. And just making sure that it's not slamming into the red. Make sure it's like clean and green, and then you can kind of like build up this gain staging into that limiter or into a clipper where it can actually control those peaks and cut them without being digitally distorted and gross. I was talking to Danny Wyatt. I mean, he's like a brilliant platinum mastering engineer. And I asked him, I was like, give me one advice on the podcast for anybody who's struggling with their mixes and getting their songs loud enough. And he's like, gain staging. He's like, you wouldn't imagine how many students I have where like they're like adding EQ and then OTT and then glue compressor, and they're like soft clipping, and they're like smashing stuff with a soft clipper. And then they add another EQ and something else. And it's like, oh, well, if you're boosting an EQ after you're clipping something with the soft or the glue compressor, you're actually adding more sound by boosting the volume of like a fixed frequency, and then you're actually going to be like digitally clipping into that EQ. So like making sure you're like slowly building stuff. Using a utility is a great way to do that too. It's like, let's say this OTT is putting me like pretty hot. I can put a utility at the end, and I can just turn down the gain a little bit to give me some wiggle room over here. Yeah, for this bass drum, let me actually undo that. So we got this sub. Actually, that's a bad example. Let's go back here. You can see right here the volume is getting pretty high, but it's not passing 0 for the bass on this sound. And then I gave it a little bit of makeup gain here. If I wanted to, I could really give it some dirt, which is nice. And if you want to clip stuff and distort it, that's really the last thing that's happening here, is it's being clipped with that glue compressor. If I wanted to add an EQ and start boosting stuff after that, we're going to get into that digital clipping, nasty distortion that we don't necessarily want. If I'm boosting stuff down here or whatever, you'll notice. See, now it's hitting in the red. It makes a huge difference. So just be conscious of your gain staging. I think that's something really important that a lot of people overlook, especially starting out with like mixing and stuff. Sometimes the second bass harmonic can get a little dirty and muddy and gross. And so, let me undo some stuff. Go away. Go away. Yeah, so the other thing too is like sometimes the second harmonic, if you're doing like synth sound design or bass design, this is like an actual bass guitar, but I noticed that like pretty easily some of the like 200 range, like around 207 to like 300 can get kind of muddy. So I did a little bit of a cut here with a dynamic EQ, which I think is like kind of nice to like really be able to clean up the mud. I noticed that like a lot of mixes between like 200 hertz or like 150 maybe to like 300, if your mix sounds kind of boomy, then that's usually where a lot of that lives, and a lot of time it's influenced by your bass. And so if you also like with your bass, like if you don't have a lot of bright stuff above like 4K, there's no reason to like not cut it. Because like a lot of times if you want your mix to sound really clean and if you want stuff to get loud enough, you've got to kind of cut out frequencies to make room for more volume to live as you're pushing up into the master. So that's something to really keep in mind too, is like cut unnecessary stuff. Especially in the leads. Like if I go into the leads here, you could see that I'm like carving out a lot of stuff, like some of these guitars. You could see that like some of these guitar licks and things I've actually done some EQ on. You can see I did some like high cuts over here for like some of these guitar parts. Like I don't need anything here below 100 hertz. It's just nothing's really living down there that I need. But they're actually, even though you don't see stuff down there, really, it still lives there. So it's like high pass filtering stuff that doesn't need to be there. This is not a bass instrument. There's no reason to have anything below 100. So that's also big, as cleaning up with EQ, unnecessary frequencies. You'll get your mixes louder and they'll sound cleaner. Resampling, like I love resampling like bass sounds, and I always unwarp a clip after I resample. Technically, it doesn't really make a difference with the audio quality if you don't change the tempo when you resample, but it kind of does, I feel like, in my head. Like, and maybe it's just me. Chuck's nodding. I feel better about this. So there is something that happens when you freeze and flatten, and then it adds like the clip is actually warped to turn on. It's defaulted to beats mode, especially if it's not drums or rhythm. Just unwarp it, because it's going to actually sound cleaner. If you do want to change the tempo, you kind of have to warp it. But hopefully at that point in time, you're like locked into your tempo, whatever BPM you're at. I'm at 88. I'm not going anywhere. So that's cool. Resampling. Let's see. Freeze playing. Yeah, don't be afraid to like flatten stuff too. Like I feel like a lot of us have commitment issues, where we're just like we'd like want to commit, but we're like, I don't want to mess it up, and you're like all precious about your music and stuff, and then like you never actually finish the song because you care too much about it, and then you're just like crying and like you're all alone in the fetal position. Like nobody wants that. Also, it's really nice to have audio because you can really clean up the tails of things too. So for example, like I have this sub, so I resampled this sub bass sound up here. Let me just close these leads. So this sound, it's really subby. We don't have a sub in here, but you can kind of get, woo! That was the wrong fader. There we go. That's also the wrong fader. Yeah, right. We're all a little deaf anyway. Yeah, so there's that. So I took that bass sound and then I resampled it, and I did a high pass filter, and then I added it with this, just some top end, just because I wanted that bass to sound a little fuzzy and kick in a little harder. So I resampled it, but it's also nice because like sometimes you can get a little pops or clips. And so even just like having stuff in audio, you can fade it really easy without having to drag utility on there, do volume automation. So that's another perk of like freeze and flattening to audio. All right, cool. So let's moving on. See how much time I have. Sweet. Leads. Let's go into the lead stuff. Bus limiting. One more thing, as we're talking about EQing and cleaning up like your frequencies and stuff, is like I use a lot of return tracks. Like I have a room. I love Valhalla. I know hybrid reverb's also really sick. Oh, that's cool. Live crashed. That's awesome. But like, yeah, round of applause. Round of applause. No, but a lot of times I'm EQing and cleaning up my like delays and my reverbs. Hybrid reverb has like a built-in EQ, which is really nice. So you can always do that. Like I'm always intentional, like even echo, if you're using Ableton's echo, like being intentional about using the filter down here. If you didn't know, open that up, and just even cleaning up anything up to like 200 hertz. A lot of times I'll do that for like any delays, like on the guitars or whatever I have. Just really being conscious of cleaning up my highs and lows for reverbs and delays and stuff can be huge. So that's another thing. Like I'll usually have a delay and a reverb, and there's a preset of saturator. I put all these on my return tracks, but I have there's a preset called rectifier. I don't know if you ever use that. I know Grizz like will send his subs a little bit. Just a little bit goes a long way. He'll send like his sub to a rectifier on a return track, because then you kind of get parallel processing. You get like a little bit of that distorted, but you get the pure sub sound as well, which is on one track, and then sending to that rectifier on a return track gives just a nice little extra grit. So yeah, like using effects on return tracks can be huge too. Also cleaning it up with an EQ at the end if needed, like if you have some kind of spacey Valhalla shimmer or some sound. What else do I have on my return track? I have a plate reverb for my snare. And there's like a lot of different ways to do this stuff, but I usually have like a plate reverb kind of sound on a snare drum. It gives it a little bit of depth and space, so it's not just a dry snare smacking you in the face, which can be kind of nice. Yeah, so I've got this snare. It's just real subtle. Just gives it a little depth. So yeah, there's that too. Bus limiting. Let's talk about our lead sound. So my leads group in here. Let's go to leads. Where you at? Same thing. I did a little bit of EQ. One thing I love about Pro Q3 is dynamic EQ. However, you're like, man, I wish the Ableton had a dynamic EQ, because it's one thing to cut something, but it's another thing to only have something duck as a frequency when necessary, rather than just carving it out of the mix as a static EQ. And so, actually, Yuta, once again, we talked about this on the podcast, super cool. There's you have the envelope follower? Are you going to show it? Okay, cool. I'll leave the view up to that. You can talk about it, and the side chaining as well with that. That'd be cool. I'll let you do that. There's also track spacer, which is really popular. A lot of times I like to create movement with auto pan, not just to pan stuff left and right to create space, but also just for having stuff wiggle. Like everybody loves a good wiggle sound, you know? Like, so for the drop 2, I have on the drop this auto pan, and without the auto pan, it's So like turning up the amount, pulling down the phase to 0, and then adjusting the offset, you can kind of get like a nice good wiggle sound. Yeah, I love auto pan for doing that kind of stuff. I'm getting close on time. Once again, watch your digital clipping on individual devices. That's why a lot of times I will like choose to turn down the output of certain things as if I'm like aggressively building up a giant chain of sounds. As far as going into the master, talking about like creating headroom, there's no like perfect number, but for me personally, I like to have at least like -6 dB of headroom. So if I turn off my mastering chain and we look over here on the main track and I just like reset the peak decibel volume, let's just see where I'm hitting. At the loudest part in the track, let's find the loudest part. Yeah, it's like around -10-ish. I feel like it's better to like have maybe a little too much volume than not enough. And so I'm hitting like -9 in there. So that's cool. And then that gives me enough room to like do all the effects processing on the master that I need to. I feel like if you're doing a good job of like Rob talked about, like picking the right tracks at the right time, like your low, mid, high instruments, you don't need to do a bunch of crazy stuff. People think of mastering as like, oh my God, like I have to have the perfect room and it has to be like EQ'd and tuned properly and I have to like do this and that. And it's like, no. Like mastering shouldn't be really that crazy intense. If you mix well and you do gain staging and you choose the right instruments and you have the dynamics processed really well, mastering is not this crazy thing. Like it's really just an enhanced form of mixing to like dial in your sound and make sure it's loud enough. That's pretty much it. It's actually funny. Slink was like talking about this and he's like, yeah, dude, if you want to pay me like $200 to throw a limiter on your master, like I'm more than happy to do that. Like, and that's basically what happens a lot of times. People will be like, yo, I'll master your track, send me a bunch of money, and then I'll just do a little bit of EQ. Maybe I'll like stereoize it and make it a little wider, and I'll just boost it with like an EQ or with a limiter or two, and that's it. It's like, cool, thanks for taking my money. I could have done that. So something to think about as well with that. But for my master, just to show you what I have a glue compressor, slowest attack, fastest release, because I'm not trying to destroy the transients as they're coming in. I want to leave the attack slow enough that it's catching stuff as it's coming in, but not cutting off my snares and kicks and dynamic things. And then a really fast release, so it's not holding on to it for a long period of time. It's actually releasing it so it has like this really dynamic bounce to the track that I want. The OTT, I actually threw an OTT on there, which I don't always really do, but it kind of sounded nice. And I pulled back the dry wet amount to 22%. A lot of times actually, and also another thing is I have noticed for the below over here on the left, which I love that they changed the interface of the OTT because a lot of this stuff was hidden before. But like if you have a 1-to-1 ratio, it's really not doing anything. And so you can see these bands are like completely down. So it's not actually forcing the input signal of these 3 bands. But I'm rather creating a ceiling, once again, like I did with the limiter, by having the below pulled all the way down. It's not pushing volume into this device. It's just creating a ceiling with these bands. And then I can use these top bands to kind of add or lose more mid-range treble and bass. So I kind of like doing this. And then also the ratio is like really low here too. Like I've got like a 2-to-1 maybe here for the above. And then the attack and release is dialed back a little bit, like 79 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, 156 milliseconds for the top, mids, and lows. And then you can adjust these crossover bands too to like, notice if I pull this band all the way down, how warm it gets. And if I pull it back, I get all that brightness back. So you can do that with your high, mids, and lows, and I find that's almost kind of like you're EQing the master a little bit and controlling the dynamics. Once again, a little Pro Key 3, which I love, some dynamic EQ. I'm not trying to carve stuff. I just found it was a little resonant around 250 hertz, so I did some of that, which you could obviously use with the envelope follower and EQ8, which Yuta's going to talk about. I like de-essing my masters. I don't think Live has a true like good de-esser that you wouldn't have to build with audio effects rack and multiple compressors and stuff. So I like Pro DS personally, and I'm just only adjusting this range between like 3K to 7K. That's where a lot of our ears are really sensitive, so I want to control some of that, and I'm not doing anything too crazy with it. You can see how hard I'm pushing it down over here on the right. Just a little bit. And if you over DS something, really basically compressing it. That's what you're doing, in like a special way. So there's that, and then I have my Pro L, and I'm hitting it, and usually on my Swiss Army meter is a great like LUFS reader. There's multiple ones out there, but I like this one. And usually I'm trying to hit the loudest point, trying to get at least like -7 LUFS or something if I'm making like dance music. Once again, if you're making jazz and stuff, probably won't be limiting stuff as hard, compressing stuff as hard, and trying to get it stupid loud. So it's all contextual. Span is my favorite. It's a great way just to read out the frequencies, and a lot of times I want my subs to match my highs at like the loudest point. So typically, usually in this readout, I'll like try to have the loudest part, maybe the drop or chorus, whatever you want to call it, to be hitting around -30 on the subs down here, the low end, and then be close to the brightness up here in the top end. I also find that a lot of times I like to dip right here between like 180 to like 300 hertz. I like to kind of reduce some of that because that's typically kind of like going to prevent a muddy or sounding mix. And then you have a correlation meter down here to see if anything's out of phase. It'll show you if stuff's going to sound hopefully decent in mono, and if you don't have any phase issues, it's going to go far to the right, which it is. That's wonderful. But yeah, those are like hopefully some little tidbits and tricks that can help you guys. Span's free. I feel like I don't know of any Max Rely devices that have an amazing spectrum analyzer. Does anybody have any spectrum analyzers or Max Rely devices that are just killer? Because I don't know of any. Yeah, I mean, we have Spectrum. We have Ableton Spectrum, obviously, but I don't think it's as detailed and as good, in my opinion, as far as using something like Span, which is free. You don't have to pay for it because we love saving money.
Vision by noise is pretty cool.
Is
It's
it?
kind of like everything. It's kind of got that tonal balance meter.
Nice.
Too.
Okay.
Also like Isotope Insight.
Yes, Isotope Insight.
What is it, like FL Studio has that wave candy thing?
Oh, okay.
The spectrogram, it almost looks like Isotope RX, but like in real time.
Yeah,
So I'll set it to that.
nice.
But it's not free.
Yeah, it's not free, unfortunately. Span is free. You can save money so you can buy a push or a move, you know?
You can do multi-channel frequency analyzing, so you can see multiple tracks together.
Yes.
It's easier to see what's masking.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, masking frequency is a real issue. Final track checklist. This is something that I look at every time I'm like, okay, I'm finished with my track. LUFS metering, I like Swiss Army Spectrum Analyzer with panning phase. You can widen stuff with utility if you wanted to. I also like Imager 2 by Ozone is free. I think that sounds really good if you want to spread stuff and widen stuff, which I did on my leads track. I want to keep stuff in mono. If you look at a lot of like some of the subs, like even on my sub bass group, I was just lazy and I threw utility on here, and then I just set the bass mono to 200 hertz. So anything below 200 is getting monoed. You have to also remember it's actually not exactly 200, which is why I had it a little higher than maybe I would at like 150 or 160, because there is the slope. You have the dB slope drop off, and I don't know exactly what it is. I'm guessing it's like 12 dB per octave, so it's not perfect. So I always go a little higher, which is normally if it was perfect, I'd be like 180 or something, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, monoing my subs on my bass group can be helpful. Transients dynamics, checking my reverbs and delays on headphones. A lot of times I'll wear headphones when I'm dialing in delays. Reverb sounds so much easier to hear when you're not listening to room interference. Pops and clicks, listen to other places. Remember, if you are having a hard time mixing and you touch it more than 3 times, you're playing with it. So don't do that. Like, sometimes if you keep twisting it, you're like, I don't know if this is good. I don't know if it's good or not, and you keep playing with it, you're fine, just move on. That's my best advice for that kind of stuff. So, any questions about this? Yeah, Ben.
With Pro L, typically where are you hitting it? Like, can you just pull up your Pro L?
Sure, yeah. But also remember, I'm doing serial limiting, so I'm limiting on the groups getting into there as well.
Gotcha.
So it's not pushing this.
Not pushing it.
I can push this harder because of that, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Red's only going down.
Oh, that's gain reduction. Okay.
Yeah, so over here on the right is the gain reduction. It's only hitting like -6 gain reduction dB over here. The other thing too is when you finish off a mix and you're uploading it for distribution, dithering, make sure you turn on dither. There's multiple dither settings. I like the dithering in Pro L, but if you wanted to do dithering in Ableton, like if you're just running it in the red, which honestly just still sounds sick, like this. Look at the master. The master is getting slammed like plus 3 or so. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the best analogy that I've heard for dithering is you're basically inserting noise into your mix because you have the computers bouncing everything down to ones and zeros, and then you have your sample rate, right? And so in between that sample rate is space of 44,100 samples per second, right? In between that is space, and so dithering is actually inserting a very, very subtle amount of noise to make it sound more natural to our ears for the computer when it's exporting. So that's basically what dithering is. It's inserting noise when you export a track so it sounds more natural in the file for humans to listen to, basically. Different types of noise, basically, and the way it's inserting it. So you have, if I was going to bounce this, let's say if I was going to bounce this. No, that's not bouncing. Command R, there we go. You have your dither options here. I would never dither twice, by the way. If you are working on a track or you export stems, I never dither stems, but I only dither on the very final master. Otherwise, you can make it sound fuzzy, and it sounds like SoundCloud, actually, because hopefully there's nobody that works at SoundCloud here. But make your stuff sound better. Dithering options, I do POWR3 for louder, more aggressive dance music. Actually, if you go to ableton.com, you can search the different dithering types, and it gives you like a description and detail of what each one is and what it could be used for. But usually I use R3 as usually what I'm using, especially if I'm clipping stuff on the master, and I'm not doing any dithering in like Pro L or a plugin for my limiter.
You're always doing dithering though when you export a master.
Yeah, when I have my final master, I usually always dither, yeah. Good questions. Anybody? Yeah.
One other quick one.
Yeah.
So I see you've got a utility right before your Pro L.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually messing with that on the track I just exported.
Oh, nice.
I was just trying to figure out, like, does it make sense to have a utility, like, to just mess with headroom, to, like, just lazily just
Oh, yeah.
down a little bit?
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah, because the utility is not coloring the sound at all. It's not actually affecting the sound unless you play with some of these controls and do weird stuff. The gain knob alone is just a gain knob. It's not affecting the sound.
Okay.
So
So if you didn't have enough headroom, you just...
yeah, totally. Yeah, and like I'm doing that on my leads group. Right here, I'm boosting the gain because the tracks are so quiet on this group, inside this group, that rather than going into the leads group and like turning all this stuff up, you know, one by one, I was happy with the balance of what it sounded like, and so I just cranked it up and shoved it into the limiter. Also, being careful not to clip the Ozone or the Pro Q3. I had a ton of headroom. So honestly, it might actually make sense even to do something like this just to be safe, having the utility before the limiter directly, and then pushing into that ceiling. So Christian's music sounds better than mine. He's going to talk about mixing. He's going to talk about mixing on a better level than I am. This is just kind of a track breakdown and workflows. But any other questions? I know we're out of time, so yeah.
I got a short one.
For sure.
Not technical in nature, but like when you're going over kind of like the mindset and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Before, I was wondering if, while making this track, if you guys like ran into any like walls and I don't know, how you were doing that.
No, Robert and I are perfect, honestly, when it comes to.
You gotta tell them why it's called the drive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, no. We actually had a massive problem. So we were producing this song, and then we went up into the mountains, and I didn't realize, because I'm an idiot, that like my hard drive was full, and so we left, and then we came back from the mountains, and we went to open the project and keep working on it, and we recorded some stuff. We were just demoing stuff before we went to the studio, and then it crashed or something. My whole computer like just died or something.
It was like outer space on the hard drive, and I've been learning a lot about cache storage.
Yeah.
Like, so it was on, I'm not trying to point
You had your rig set up where I think the cache was on the drive.
It was, yeah, it was caching on my hard drive, and so it was eating up so much space was being eaten up.
And when we came back, it basically was like corrupted.
It corrupted. It was corrupted, yeah. So I was caching so much. We recorded so much audio, and I've had so much stuff, and I never emptied my trash can. I just kept throwing stuff in the trash can. And then, I realized that, oh, shoot, like my hard drive's full. And the problem with that is you can't, so it corrupts the project, and you can't open that project again, even if you go to backup, which was, I had no idea. So we tried going to the backup in an older version, and the whole project would not open because it was corrupted from a full hard drive. Even though I deleted stuff, the project would not open.
We took some video though, and you kind of very quickly were like, I want this still, I want this.
Yeah.
Great way of being
We
like,
literally started, which honestly probably turned out to be a blessing because we approached it differently. I mean, we had a whole maybe minute of the song done, and then we just tried to remember everything we did and re-recorded everything from scratch and built it back up again pretty quick.
That was pre going to the studio.
That was before, yeah, we were just demoing a track and coming up with ideas, and then we took it there to re-record and re-track a lot of stuff, yeah. So heads up, make sure you have space on your hard drive when you're producing, for sure. So anyway, cool. Yeah, thanks. That's pretty much it. Nice.